Hey everyone, how are you feeling? We are almost at the end of this third Modular Summit. How are you doing? Feeling good? Still have a bit of energy? I'm really excited about this panel. I feel like I've been sort of looking forward to it all day. When putting together this program, Yaz was kind of saying like there was an attempt to have more of a focus on applications. I don't know if it was successful, but that was sort of the push. And with today's panel, the plan is to actually talk about ZK applications. But even still in the ZK space, I feel like we're probably going to end up talking about some of the infrastructure just leading up to the applications. But we're getting closer. Like, you know, a few years ago, we were really talking about the proving systems only. Then it was like some implementations of those proving systems. Then it's like scaling solutions. Then it's co-processors. You're still in infrastructure. You're getting closer, but you're not quite at the user. But today I have three guests with me that I feel are working much, much closer to the user. And actually maybe in your case, directly with the user, so a true application. Let's start off with a couple intros. Ayush, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. I'm Ayush. I work on ZK email primarily. So the idea is that you can make proofs about any email you've sent or received and use that to either trigger blockchain transactions via emails directly or use it to prove any identity information that you already have in your inbox.
Cool. I'm Tracy. I'm the co-founder of Pluto, and we're making web proofs, which is a proof of internet data that you can use for a variety of things we'll talk about.
Hi, I'm Florent. I'm working on proof of passport. And what we're doing is making it really easy for users to scan the data that's in the NFC chips of their government-issued ID, whether it's like ID cards, whether it's like purely digital ID, whether it's passports, and making sure that they can do like selective proofs of specific things with it without like disclosing all of their private data if they want to like be compliant or just prove that they are real human beings.
And maybe just to make a slight distinction between these projects. So in your case, you're actually working with an end user. So you have an application.
Yeah.
So yours is a true ZK application.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. Wow, yeah, we have one.
A use case.
But the
Use case has emerged.
The other two, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think of what you're doing as like just before that application. The web proofs, like a developer would be using these, right?
Yes, but they live in your web app, and we'll probably build some applications. I don't want to spoil things.
Okay. So
ideas.
you might go forward to the user.
I know, it's crazy.
Well, I would say we have, I think you sort of need both. We have this library. It's like in 8 lines, you can define like a new type of proof, or you can, in 3 lines of the SDK, you can trigger a transaction from an email wallet. But it's also, I think, to know what to build, we also have to be building the applications or work very closely with people who are building the applications. So in our case, I think we saw ZK P2P at one of the ZK hacks take some of the ZK email tech and just run.
Yep.
And that even deployed itself on mainnet using ZK email tech, which was really cool. And then on the core ZK email team side, to give ourselves kind of product feedback, we also have some, I guess you could kind of say this is a user-facing application, but it's like 2FA and account recovery on existing wallets with emails. And so it's kind of like an add-on to any existing wallet, but we are going to see, as the moment we launch on mainnet, probably next month, we'll see users start actually making these proofs for wallets.
Okay. I'm trying to come up with like a slight definition though of what category, like at what level are these projects that you're building, you two? It's almost like just under the application.
It's like middleware. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like,
I always feel bad when I call something middleware.
I know, it's a horrible. It's an SDK,
yeah,
API.
It's got like a weird.
The reason is it's like not a pure protocol, right? So we can't just ignore all the realities of how like user experience and DevX experience works and just like write pure Rust code and ship it. We actually have to like get into the meaty bits of how web apps and like mobile apps work.
Yeah.
So that starts to get to like middleware.
I see.
I see it as like there's kind of, like some sort of dev tooling layer between the user or the application developer and the ZK stack. So they don't need to think about CIRCOM or ZK or constraints. They just define the parameters of their proof, and we figure all of that out for them.
Very cool. Let's talk a little bit about ZK applications, So in your case, you're doing proof of passport, and like, I think that's firmly in like the ID type application. And I feel like there are other variations of that. So the one you're doing is working with, I guess, the NFC chip in a passport, in a physical passport. There are others that do identity based on like on-chain activity. You had mentioned like Stripe. So this is like, I guess, photo KYC, or is it just because you have an account or you have a bank account? Like, how does that?
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of identity information stored in different places, and passports is one, and central databases like Stripe or like even Coinbase KYC is like an example of identity data. I mean, usually it depends on some sort of identity document in order to get that data into Coinbase, but then you can kind of transport it out of that with a proof.
Although I'm just realizing, actually, those aren't ZK examples. Those are just regular ID examples. But ZK...
Yeah, those are just standard ID. Yeah. But the ability to port it around and have authenticity is where ZK comes into the picture there.
But there were also previously like ZK ID, which were like, I mean, this is a project I always bring up, like Sysmo. I just thought that was so cool, the badges and stuff, and like ZKPs to accounts that were unattached to activity that had happened on other accounts. You're currently in the ID space. Are there any other sort of like ZK ID variations that you've seen?
Yeah, so we're actually mostly working on passports, but now there's a few teams. Well, there's a few teams working on passports, and there's also
I think I know you and two others.
Yeah. There's like the Rari More Freedom Tools people. There's like ZK Passport. There's also a lot of teams like just prototyping like ID stuff. So there's one doing like the Taiwanese digital identity. There's like Mina Wallet doing it with the My Number cards in Japan, which are really nice because they can like sign transactions, do a bunch of things. There's like different ID systems, and my take on all of this is that like trust and like identity online have been extremely hard to make work basically since the beginning of like the internet in the 90s, because like data is really like simple to, I guess, transmit and send and store, but trust is much harder to transmit because it relies on these like very human like interactions and networks. And this is why basically like every like web of trust like system that has tried to do like under collateralized lending or something has pretty much like not worked because it's like very easy to attack. But I think the key thing that's happening right now is that ZK is becoming just practical enough that we can like take all of the sources of identity that are not purely on-chain, right? And I think this is the mistake that Sysmo made. Like personally, like they just focused on the on-chain stuff, but like now we can take like ID cards, passports. Okay, they're not perfect. Like, I guess countries can cheat and like mint an arbitrary number of passports, right? But they're not doing it right now. So right now we can use it to like bootstrap those networks, and then maybe later we have like other problems of like, oh, the like countries are cheating or something. But when that's the case, half of the work is already done because we can like bootstrap those like very like reliable like trust systems, and I guess like signatures is like the kind of perfect way to like do it because you can directly prove them in ZK. And like for other things, you've got like TLS notary style designs and like other designs that you can use to like port this data in Web3.
It has felt like there's sort of a disconnect between some of the ZK ID stuff and the stuff that people actually use for IDing things. And still, even in the examples you gave, I feel like there's one missing. And I'm curious if anyone else does this, but like whenever I'm trying to verify whether something is real, I actually just go on Twitter to see if that company released that link or that somebody I know from that team has like clearly put it, and I will not even always trust that one tweet because that could be compromised too. But it's so weird if you think about it. Like that's my attempt to get that, authenticity stamp. It's quite weak, but yeah, I'm thinking like this bringing together of all of these different senses for identity will be really exciting. And ZK does seem to be the only thing so far that can really do it.
Yeah, I think building on what Florence said, I think ZK lets you have portability of trust without a custodian. So in the past, you had to kind of trust somebody else to go get information from one place, move it to another, and you needed a custodian in the middle. And now you can just carry forward the provenance of that trust, which is a powerful primitive.
Do either of your products do that though? Like, would you say, like that thing I just described, where like you go to Twitter to see if it was tweeted?
Oh, I
like
see.
A verification, like.
Yeah, I think like we could make a proof of a tweet having happened, and I guess you could carry that around. You could bring it to a different website or to a blockchain. That's a little bit less about the authenticity of that tweet, though. It's more just like taking for granted that it was truth when it was tweeted. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think similarly on proving data from a place like Twitter, I think when you want to get that Web 2 data onto Web 3, the ideal world is somehow Twitter has made a digital signature attesting this is what happened. And then you can wrap that digital signature in any ZK proof and prove it on chain. And a lot of the trouble we've had is that these signatures are quite elusive. Like most platforms don't really sign most things. Some social media platforms like Blue Sky or Farcaster have really been like signature maxis, like every post is signed, every action is signed. And that's like huge because those are immediately interoperable with not just on-chain tools, but any tool that connects to on-chain tools. And so that's like quite powerful, and you can really build really interesting systems on top of that. And like in the Twitter example, for instance, they send some interesting emails, which you can directly hijack the signature off of and make proof. So for instance, they can tell you, oh, here's what's in your feed today. Or they can tell you, hey, this is your username. And so you can get some of those directly, but for the others, you need to trust like a notary or a proxy or something like that, which is still better than what we have today, which is nothing at all.
Yeah, this is like exactly the limitation with web data today, is none of this stuff is signed. So you have to come up with some clever scheme in order to emulate signatures, which I admit is like a shitty solution because you have a collusion problem. Collusion, like literally I was laying awake last night thinking about this collusion problem because it literally keeps me awake, and trying to devise clever schemes to avoid it. But I think the perfect solution would be like all the web servers just emit signed data, right?
Yeah.
There's a spec called SXG, which is about signed exchanges, I think it's called, but about signed web data. I'm like somewhat pessimistic this happens at scale in the next few years, but maybe we can kind of encourage the adoption of it and also show the demand for it by using a tool that may have collusion risk to start building use cases that are interesting, like the Twitter account escrow I talked about a little bit earlier and other things.
Yeah. Tracy, you just gave a presentation earlier today, so I think we have a better sense for web proofs and how that's built. You had a bunch of people asking you questions, also kind of figuring that out. But Ayush, we didn't hear from you about how ZK email works a little bit deeper. And I think it would be good, especially because I have these other use cases I want to kind of bounce off you guys. So I think it's important for us to understand exactly what that's doing, because that is sort of one of those workarounds you talked about, where it's like we don't have access into the companies, but the only thing we have from them are the emails that they're sending out, and then we can do stuff with that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the core idea behind ZK email is that we hijack the signature on every sent email. So for instance, since 2017, there's been this DKIM standard in play in which all sent emails, the sending mail server signs with an RSA key. And so the idea is that, say, Venmo sends you an email. In order to land in your Gmail inbox and get verified, Venmo needs to sign it with an RSA private key, and then sign the from, the to, the subject, and the hash of the body. And then you can verify that, and specifically Gmail mail server does when you receive that email, to check, oh, does this key that signed it match the key that Venmo posted on DNS? And so what we can do is we can wrap that entire thing inside a ZK proof, and then we also build regex inside a ZK proof, and we threw regex on top of that, and now you can parse out any data you want in that email and make just that data public. And so the idea is that, yeah, it's a little bit like cheeky. Like we're taking this data that was never really meant to be proven, that was never really meant to be outside of your own inbox, and we're kind of hijacking and say, hey, we can prove like your email domain, or we can prove your username, or we can prove
you
your
have
bank
an
statement
account
or something like that. Yeah.
And the example you had given there was ZK P2P, where it's like a Venmo account, and you're using the literal. This took a while to sort of realize what it really was, but it's like the literal emails that Venmo, the company, is sending the user is what you're using. It's awesome.
It was really cool. I mean, we didn't even communicate with ZK P2P by the time they had built the first version of their product, and then we were like, oh wow, yeah, this is great. I'm so glad someone did this. And it's really lucky. It's like it just happens to be the case that Venmo provides these really nice emails, which they have the sender, the receiver, and the amount, which is exactly what you need to prove that a transaction happened on chain.
Yeah, that's so cool. I want to now So we've covered ID somewhat, but I want to now think of some other cases. So traditionally, ZK applications were used for payments, or the ZK application was payments. And we gave one example, which is kind of like a modern version of that, which is the ZK P2P example. Are there other ZK payment systems, other than like Zcash and the kind of more traditional ones, that can use your tools? Or can you envision sort of other ways that you could create ZK payment applications?
I mean, I guess one thing that's interesting it's not just payments, it's like the intersection of payments and ID, is that now that we have all of those like reliable sources of identities, we can do stuff like, for instance, instead of having to KYC into all of those different payment providers and banks and everything, maybe I can just like show that I have like signed data from the government from my passport or ID card that shows that I can do this transaction. Like for instance, I do like locally a proof that I'm not on the OFAC list at the time when I send the transaction. And so even if the OFAC list is updated every time, I can just like prove that again. And this is actually all doable in circuits, which is like really cool. One of the things we're working on, I'm very excited by. And like, I guess what's interesting is like a lot of like payment systems from like Zcash to Tornado, and like those are basically all the same designs, right, in the end. Also the same idea as Semaphore. It's like basically just proving like you are included in a big Merkle tree in a snark. Like they were not really like suitable for anything that could like combine with the traditional financial system, because they were so like obfuscated. And so I think it's one of the things that made like some actors kind of think that, oh, like ZK is necessarily dangerous because it's like this privacy preserving thing. But if we can show that you can have the privacy preserving properties for what you want, like I don't want to disclose all of my data to like many different companies every time I KYC, because it's just like obviously not secure, there's going to be leaks. It's like sure in the long term, but like just use it still to like have enough like I guess compliance or just like rules so that we can be interoperable with the rest of the financial system, which has those rules. Then we can unlock a huge thing that's like a way bigger bridge between like I guess the crypto world and the rest of the world, and that can like allow us not to be that I guess isolated from like the rest of the economics.
Mm. Yeah, doing that while preserving and sort of the values of like a blockchain, that you have privacy and these types of things. It feels super powerful. Like the regulation probably like would need to change for this to ultimately work in the best way possible. But because my understanding of it right now is like KYC has to originate on the place where you're going to like do the money transmission. And so if you try to like prove that KYC or bring it across from a different system, you can't really use it to be KYC'd in a new system. So I talked to a couple companies about this, like, could you build a KYC flow purely with ZK KYC? And they were like, no, it won't meet our regulation, but hopefully someday.
Yeah, I think also one underrated payment ZK overlap is actually UX. Like you don't usually think of ZK as having very sleek UX. It's like, oh, the proof takes some time to generate. But it turns out that some of the things we stumbled upon are actually you can improve the UX of payments with, for instance, ZK email. Like for instance, you send a transaction, if it's over $1,000, then your multi-sig automatically has an email signer and it says, hey, are you sure you want to do this transaction of $1,000 over email? And you confirm, and then now the transaction goes through. And so this was like one of the cool things we built, where it's like, oh, this actually improves the UX of payments and improves security in a way that one wouldn't really necessarily expect ZK to do.
Oh, that's fascinating. As you guys are talking about KYC, sorry, I started to just laugh at this is a little side tangent. I think Amin did a talk about like how KYC is evil, and I don't know if I fully agree with exactly the thing in there. I think there's reasons and there's times where you understand why KYC exists. But if you have ever done KYC for a lot of different jurisdictions or companies, and I'm assuming some of you guys have, it's almost like no matter what you did on the other one, you're going to have to do something new on this one. First, it's a picture. Then it's you and the passport. Then it's you tapping your head, turning around,
rubbing your belly.
Make it like on one knee, like picture of your house, making sure you're with you and a dog. Like it just gets weirder and the questions get stranger. And I guess that's why, even though the dream is, and I don't know if everyone knows how the ZK KYC would potentially work, but it's like you show your data once, you show the passport is valid, you show it's not on list, you kind of like prepare all those things, you wrap them up into a proof, and then all people need to see is that the proof verifies. So like the thing has been checked and now it verifies. That's the dream. But it's true that these systems are so freaking different every time.
Yeah, I think people have daydreamed a little bit about like a one password, you know, you like have all your passwords, but instead you have all your proof material sort of stored in this thing, and you go to a website and you need the KYC and you click a button, proof material gets pulled into the website, none of your privacy is leaked, the website checks it, it's like, that looks good to me, and you're through.
Yeah.
That's like a pure UX win for actual users.
If it worked that way.
It's technically possible. It's just a distribution problem.
It will happen.
You think so?
Yes.
I like this.
I think it will happen.
Optimism.
The question is, who does it? Does Apple do it in Apple Wallet, or do
True,
other
true.
people do it?
If Apple, yeah, maybe if one of the big ones does it. So we've talked a little bit about ID. We've now done KYC, which is kind of related. We've talked a little bit about payments. I now want to just like share if you know other kinds of uses for like ZK, and now, because now, you know, the purpose of this panel was really like the application level. Like maybe it's ideas that you have, things you want to build, or things that have already been built using your system, or maybe it's like other applications that you would use yours with.
I think so we were very curious about this precise question, and so we ran this residency where Florent and I were at during May called like Signature Singularity, where we were exploring what are all the signatures we can find in the wild.
Wow.
Can we make a bunch of proofs of them, and can we build them into user apps where everybody at the end of the month has to be able to try your app, like it has to be user friendly.
Yeah.
And there were a bunch of really weird signatures we didn't expect. So there was, I mean, Florent mentioned some of the ID ones earlier, like the Mina card. There was also one interesting one around app attest. So it turns out that, for instance, Apple signs that your app executed correctly on the iPhone. And so you can prove, oh yeah, I actually queried the location API and I actually returned this value. And then I queried the image, the camera API, and then returned this face. And okay, you know, if somebody goes through all the process of jailbreaking their phone, maybe they can get past it. But overall, it's like for 99% of users, this is kind of like a very user-friendly way for them to interact with ZK, and it's a very nice way to get kind of proof of app execution onto a ZK proof and interoperating with other things. So that was a really interesting exploration. There's also one line of research which like Cursive is kind of leading, which is I thought was very curious, which is that ZK provides truth, but what do you do with that truth? And so the whole shtick is maybe ZK alone is interesting, but what if you combine ZK with 2PC, FHE, and you build really interactive social experiences that are really fast, and you use lots of advanced cryptography. And we actually saw some of this stuff at ZK11 in Athens, where the attendees put things about themselves in the app, and you could tap somebody else's NFC and overlap with PSI, which is like this other crazy cryptographic primitive, like the things you have in common without sharing it to a server.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Any other? First of all, I don't know, is there a write-up of all of those ideas that you had?
Yeah, there's a ton. So if you go to demo.sigsing.com, like demo.sigsing.com, we have like an hour-and-a-half demo video where each of like maybe 15 teams presents like, here's some crazy signature we found, here's something we made a proof, and here's a QR code that you can literally try right now.
That's so cool. I'm gonna kind of mark that also because we have an upcoming hackathon, ZK Hack Montreal, just in case anyone wants to check it out. But we're always looking for really cool use cases, so it might be fun for people coming to that to check it out before.
Yeah, I think it's useful both as like inspiration, like, whoa, I didn't know you could do this. What if we built this thing on top of it? And also like, here's a bunch of open source code like that now I can use to adapt to this new signature I found, or that I can make a little bit more efficient by making it in this proof system. And I think it's a really cool start of like a brainstorming tree, I think.
Very cool. Okay, Tracy, I want to hear some of these weird
All right,
app
let's see.
ideas
So
you have.
I've been thinking about traditional payment rails a little bit, like credit cards and debit cards, and potentially attaching to the back end like proof of a transaction happening there. So there's this smart young guy, I know his name's Sofian. He's been brainstorming some ideas around the Stripe API and using that with credit cards. But we had actually like both had ideas around, can I create a credit card and on demand have someone else fund it for me and have sort of anonymous payments. So like I could anonymously buy something and the company that I'm purchasing from, the e-commerce store, won't learn how it was funded. And I could maybe even fund it with like money from Zcash. So that's a cool one. And I think he's developing some other really clever ideas around gamifying that. So that's one I've been excited about lately.
I want to add to that, like I don't think things like Gnosis Pay have ZK in them, but I wonder if they could. Do you know what I'm talking about with that? Gnosis
Yeah,
Pay,
that's like a debit card for expenses or something.
It's a Visa, it's a credit card, but it's attached to like a Gnosis account. So you're actually, it's a not, like, you know how like crypto.com used to do?
Right.
Like you could pay with
connect it to
Bitcoin,
your
but
wallet,
they live
essentially.
in their, like it's custodial. In this
Yeah.
case, it's like non-custodial that.
Yeah, I've actually been meaning to like dig into the ACH rails that and the debit credit rails that underlie
that's what
this.
they're using, yeah.
I used to actually work at Stripe and I would work on these things.
Yeah.
And there's Visa uses SFTP actually to like register payment completions. So you like upload this multi-megabyte file to an SFTP server owned by Visa. And I've been like brainstorming, like, could I like somehow scheme a way to like prove I SFTP'd this? Unfortunately, like you have to have this deep relationship with Visa in order to do that. But
Yeah.
maybe there's other rails globally that like this could happen with.
I think they built a relationship with Visa too. I think that was like, it's a fully accepted
yeah, those
official
types of
card.
things are, they're very official, but I think the money movement in those systems is pretty fixed. So if you could find rails that are more flexible, it could be less fixed.
I mean, one interesting note is also like the first version of the Gnosis Pay card, like a long time ago, actually was making a digital signature. It was saying like, hey, like this is your private key on the card, and the private key is going to sign some stuff, and Visa is going to pick that up. And I think for UX reasons, they ended up switching to their current version, which is a little bit more UI friendly. But I think also Florent did a bunch of exploration with credit cards.
Yeah, so me and Ayush, we like experimented a bit with like actually getting like normal credit cards to sign things. And the fun thing is that they actually like sign transactions in some way. We couldn't get like down to the like lowest levels of like actually modifying what they do, but I'm like 100% sure it's possible. It's just like digging a lot in the EMV spec and everything, and I think it's like a very
I'm familiar with this.
Yeah, I think it's like a very
Let's do
low-hanging
it.
fruit for like hackathons and everything because it's like a very fun stuff, and you could actually use it to do like kind of ZK P2P type system. Like it's always kind of it's kind of like using things that were not like meant for this. So like it might not work in every case, but I think it's still interesting to like prototype and basically have a system in which you can like peer-to-peer on-ramp or off-ramp using like someone that has registered as a Visa merchant and like just signing things with your card and proving that you send it and everything.
I really like this. It's like
We're
we're
like the-
brainstorming it right now.
The on-ramping counterparty is the merchant, like the merchant acquirer.
Yeah.
This is a cool idea.
Well, you have to register with Visa, but once this is done, you can like sign things with your phone. Like you can emulate a terminal on your phone, so you can just sign with your phone and your card.
That's awesome.
That's cool. Okay, so that was one example, Tracy, that you gave, which was like revisiting payments. Anything else? You had the Twitter, selling Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a general big idea I've been pursuing. We're not quite there yet, but basically selling valuable Web 2 assets. So you might have a Twitter account that is of financial value. There might also be actions you can take on Twitter that are of financial value, but this is true on many websites. And being able to like actually create a system that without a counterparty or an escrow can exchange those with an anonymous person on the internet. It's something I want to actualize.
Does that need a blockchain, kind of? Would it be something like
So
you would create
I've actually
a
been
proof?
thinking of it as a non-blockchain centric market where you have like two legs to the journey. You sort of have like the leg onto the blockchain for the first proof and the leg off the blockchain for like money into your Venmo. So like I think the ideal user experience is I go to sell my Twitter, I like enter a few things, I create a few proofs, maybe it's like 20 proofs, but a few proofs, and then I get money in my Venmo account.
It's funny that you go to Venmo. Why not just get paid
like
on
Revolut,
the blockchain?
like wherever you want.
Why regular money? Why not just buy it with
Nobody
crypto?
uses blockchains.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Oh, what am I thinking?
It's
true.
I'm not all doom and gloom, but it's facilitated by a blockchain, but the
But
users
here-
don't have to on-ramp and learn how
me,
wallets work and this
It's just
stuff.
funny though that you go through a blockchain to get to the payments when blockchains were kind of meant.
Yeah, it ends
to
up
be
being the
payment.
custodian. It's the person who can
Immutable.
check these. It's the mechanism that can check these proofs.
Yeah. Okay, so that was another one. I want to keep going in that direction though, because there's some very interesting things. Okay, so Tracy, when you were talking about being able to prove the balance in a bank account,
Right.
I guess this would be getting access to things, getting accreditation of some kind because you can prove something in your
Yeah,
life. I
I
guess
think-
it's still in the KYC bucket.
Yeah,
Or
there's,
something.
There's interesting social consequences. I don't know if this is interesting, but private group chats where you have to be a millionaire to get in there, or in order to
Yikes.
post on Reddit, I have to Reddit about GameStop stock, right? I have to prove I own, prove I've got millions of GameStop, and then I'm the authority, even though I'm anonymous, right?
Dude, that's such a good idea. If you
Yeah.
all that noise out there for people who often don't have
Right.
any skin in anything, and they actually don't even know what they're talking about. The person hasn't even read the book or seen the movie or bought that thing, and they're
Right.
shitting
It's
on it.
demonstrating some authority. Yeah.
Wow, that's really neat.
Yeah, I guess another interesting thing is Sybil resistance in general. So for instance, because of the big bot problem in Twitter, there was all of this talk about for instance, Musk creating this blue check thing in which you can pay, and a lot of bots ending up just paying it, and so now the replies on the every tweet are just way worse than before all of this was even instantiated. And I'm not so sure it's it would be so easy to Sybil attack this kind of systems if you had to actually use attestations ID cards or passports or even other Web 2 data attestations, the fact that you have Google, Twitter accounts that are all connected by the same email. You can do snacks of this using ZK-JWTs and aggregating all of those sources of data. And yeah, I think it's very interesting to think about what social medias could be if verifiable trust and attestations were built into them directly.
I think there's also, two use cases that we've been thinking about. One is this kind of, I think it's maybe a little bit clickbaity the way people talk about AI and crypto, but I think there's two very interesting verticals here, which are, in my opinion, changed quite a bit by ZK. One is how you sell training data to these kind of AI companies. Currently, some central middle company, like Facebook or whatever, sells all your data directly. But if users can prove they own the data, they own the username, and then they group together in these data DAOs like Vana is doing, and then you sell that directly to the buyer of that data, then you can split it on amongst the users in kind of this data guild format. And I think that's requires ownership proofs with ZK to be able to do this, which is I think one cool thing that's unlocked. It's kind of on the training side of AI, and then on the inference side of AI, there's often these models. It's very hard to tell whether something came from a model or from reality. And I think you talked about the KYC checks, and those get way worse. Now you can have a model generate yourself holding up 3 fingers and dancing on a ball, and it worked totally fine. And so if you want to get around that, I think it's actually good that now the AIs can do that, because now you have to trust cryptography. There's no way around it. And so you have to build these rails, or else you're not going to be able to tell truth from fake things anymore. And Tracy mentioned this in the talk, but there's this whole line of research around perceptual hashing, where now if you can make, let's say you have some image and Canon signs some perceptual hash, or OpenAI signs a perceptual hash, hey, I generated this image and it looks roughly like this. And now you see some image floating around online, and you say, hey, here's an image I found. The perceptual hash looks like it matches. You can do that in FHE and prove that you found that match in ZK and say, hey, this image that I saw that's cropped and compressed on WhatsApp actually came from OpenAI, or actually came from the New York Times, or actually came from Canon. And so there's a lot of these really weird kind of out there use cases that only crop up when AI is strong enough that it actually like changes dynamics of how humans interact.
Yeah. Although that example, because like we know we've done experiments around the more basic form of that, which is like the ZKPs to prove provenance through transformations, but it's dependent on the first thing having a signature, and it's dependent on whatever tool you're using to make the changes having this like ZKP creation. And so it's like if you took then like a screenshot of the thing and did something to it, it loses it. So it's, and I even know some teams doing it, and I really want to see that in the world. I think it should be in the world, but at the moment it still feels like an experiment. Like, I don't know how it gets really, really believed or used. I don't know how it gets like authority.
I think the Proteus approach of using perceptual hashes is really strong there, because the perceptual hash is robust to screenshots transformation.
What is that perceptual hash? What is this?
You can think of this as like an intermediate embedding that an AI model generates or something. Is like, oh, here's like 160 bits that describe, something of the form. There's some edges here, and there's a cat on that tree or something like that. And that is, even if you compress, crop, change, whatever, you can still map it back to, oh, this is kind of the core information that was in the image. And this means you don't have to do proof of transformation. You don't need Instagram to implement this into their editing app. And you don't need a signature to come from the original OpenAI source. You can say, someone else can be like, hey, I am the trusted, I look at New York Times every single morning and I sign every image and I put it up here. And as long as you trust I did my job in the morning, it's good enough. And so now you've removed both those requirements. You don't need the original signer to sign, although it is nice. And you don't need the image editing app to include it, which in my opinion is never going to happen. Like, it's so heavy and it's so difficult. You need to have a way to reverse engineer these images without doing the transformation.
So in this case, though, you're proving that it is AI. You're not proving...
Or not AI. Like, you can prove, oh, I can prove the New York Times put this on the homepage.
Okay.
And then it's like, yep, that image, maybe it's AI, maybe it's not, but at least the New York Times attested to it at this point in time. And you can prove that even with a web proof. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, one thought that came to mind is like, while Ayush was going through this, is like the more adversarial the environment becomes, which I think AI is making the internet an increasingly adversarial environment, the more important cryptography becomes. And I think this is a trend really I'm thinking a lot about. Over the next 10 years, I think the environment's going to continue to get adversarial, and the defensive tech we can use to counteract that is really cryptography.
Oh, I've also had that thought. I didn't know exactly how that looks, but it seems like cryptography, even blockchain, but ZK seems like it's like the humanness, hopefully preserved somehow against this wave of other stuff.
Yeah, they can do fake like images of everything, but they can break D-log. Right now, at least they cannot break like discrete log and like all of what we use, which is cool.
Yeah, for now.
For now.
If cryptography is lost, is all lost?
I mean, that's the ultimate DAC tech. Like, it's the ultimate defense system we have.
Is it the ASI? It's the artificial superintelligence. So before that, hopefully we can still hide behind the cryptography. We have 15 seconds left on the clock. What should we do?
Audience question?
Is there an audience question?
I don't have a question, but this is the best fucking panel I attended for years.
I think so too. I just said that. I like this.
Like,
Here's to the real ones in the room. Thank you.
It's not just discussion how cool my project is or how cool my project is. It's just about things that people will actually touch within like next 5, 10, whatever, 20 years. And it's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Cool. Any other questions? Comments?
So, the way that all of your approaches are going about things, you're not like, the data provider is not expecting these tools to be used this way. But why not like GDPR to get data from the big tech companies and maybe put it in a Merkle tree and...
Yeah, you can use a web proof to pull a zip of your Google GDPR data and unzip it and prove that it contains some information. I think GDPR is in a weird way an enabler of some of this.
That's interesting. Anyone else? Oh.
Hey, So what do you guys think is the best way to have cyber resistance for like airdrops or on social media? Like, is it just about like if you prove you have a Reddit account with an Amazon account and you bought stuff, that adds up a certain amount of points, and then a passport would like for example would add the most points? Like what's your idea on that?
So I think that like all of the recent airdrops have kind of shown that like airdrops cannot continue like going the way they are right now, because it's like basically a lot of just like people just civil attacking them, and like it's really hard for them to actually understand how they can like incentivize real activity on what they're doing. So a really interesting approach is what Gitcoin Passport has been doing, and they started doing it originally for Gitcoin quadratic funding grant rounds, right? And so they have this system in which you can like connect all of your accounts, basically like Google, Twitter accounts and everything, and you can like have this scoring system, and if your score passes a certain threshold, then you like get access to like you pass as a real human, and it's actually quite good. Like we tried to like basically break it by like creating accounts, and it's actually like quite hard, so I think it's like interesting. My guess is that we have to go further than that. Like, for instance, they're not matching like attributes in between like multiple things. So you can actually like just connect accounts that have different emails, different names. You could actually match them, and you could actually match them in ZK so that you don't even have to reveal to Gitcoin Passport itself like the link between your accounts. You could do like this kind of thing like way more generally with like other attestations that have just like recently been prototyped in ZK, like IDs and everything. And I think it's like really the way to go for civil resistance.
That really was what Sysmo was too. Sorry, every time you say it, I'm just like, Sysmo, why? It was such a cool project. I don't know if you guys know it.
I've been thinking about this a bit too. I think you probably also just want a model to estimate the quality of an account at the end of the day. So one of my like brainstorms is every transaction comes with a proof, and that proof it's similar. There's a tool called Stripe Radar, which like checks for fraud with credit card transactions, but it's the same kind of thing for like blockchain transactions. You bundle up a bunch of this information in your magical 1Password that has all your proof data, and you run it through a basic scoring classification model. And maybe the app developer who builds that app could even like layer in new factors on demand when they like see a new attack come through or an emerging threat happens.
Wow.
And be like, oh, actually, I need a little bit more information because someone's been breaking our system lately. They can stick this in, and it'll just pick it up, include it in the proof, and your transaction settles with its proof.
That's such a good idea. But yeah, what you were trying to prove with that, and I guess your question was sort of like finding a way to prove like real, genuine activity of a user instead of these silly kind of like, farming just tons of accounts doing dumb things. Yeah. Huh. Anything else we should talk about? I think if not, then we can wrap up our panel, our last panel on this stage for Modular Summit 3.0. For some of us, it's also the last event and thing that we're doing at all. So this has been a really crazy week. Agni, who is from the ZKV team, and Cohen, thank you guys for hosting the stage. Why don't we give them a quick round of applause. Thank you guys for coming to this last panel. Thanks for watching all of the talks on the ZK track. This was done by the ZKV company project. We're a validator running on 12 networks. So if you, and on Celestia. So you can also find us there if you want to delegate to us. Cool. All right, I think that wraps us up. Thanks.